The morning sun bit hard against the horizon like an angry rattlesnake as Quentin Frost tipped his worn Stetson lower, protecting his eyes from the harsh glare while he tended to his morning ritual. Steam rose from the dented tin pot nestled in the embers of his campfire, the rich aroma of coffee beans his most prized possession drifting upward into the cool Wyoming air of 1878. Nobody touched Quentin's coffee, not his horse, not trail partners. Not even his own brother when they'd ridden together years back. It was the one luxury he permitted himself in a life otherwise defined by hardship and solitude. The coffee was brewing strong when the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the stillness of the prairie dawn. Quentin's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his side, thumb resting on the hammer as he squinted toward the horizon. A lone rider approached, silhouetted against the rising sun. As they drew closer, Quentin's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected sight of a woman astride a magnificent chestnut mare. Her honey-colored hair was tied back in a practical braid, and she wore men's riding clothes that were covered in trail dust. She looked exhausted, her face drawn with fatigue, but there was a determined set to her jaw that gave Quentin pause. "Morning," she called, pulling her horse to a stop several yards from his camp. "Smelled your coffee from half a mile back." Her voice carried a slight Eastern accent, refined but with an edge of something harder beneath it. "Morning," Quentin returned cautiously, not moving his hand from his gun. "Name's Catherine Adler," she said, seeming to notice his wariness. "I've been riding through the night. My canteen's empty and that coffee smells like heaven itself." She paused, her eyes meeting his directly. "Would you spare a cup?" Quentin stared at her, momentarily speechless. In 15 years of riding the trails of the West, not once had he shared his precious coffee with another soul. It was his ritual, his comfort, the one constant in a life of endless movement. "Please," she added, and something in her voice, a note of genuine weariness rather than weakness, made him hesitate. "Tie up your horse," he found himself saying, the words surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise her. "Coffee'll be ready in a minute." Catherine Adler dismounted with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent considerable time in the saddle, though Quentin noted she moved with a slight stiffness that suggested her journey had indeed been long. She secured her mare to a nearby scrub oak before approaching his camp, stopping at a respectful distance. "Thank you," she said simply. Not many folks would welcome a stranger to their fire these days. "Didn't say I was welcoming you," Quentin replied, but there was less edge to his voice than he'd intended. "Just offering coffee." She smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her trail-worn face. "That's more welcome than you know." Quentin busied himself with the coffee pot, pouring the steaming black liquid into 2 tin cups. He passed one to Catherine, watching as she wrapped her hands around it, savoring the warmth before taking a cautious sip. "Good Lord," she breathed, closing her eyes momentarily. "That might be the best coffee I've ever tasted." Despite himself, Quentin felt a flicker of pride. "Secrets in the roasting, do it myself." Catherine took another appreciative sip. "You're a man of hidden talents, Mr. Frost, Quentin Frost." "Well, Mr. Frost, your coffee-making skills are exceptional." She held the cup between her hands like it contained liquid gold. "What brings you to this particular stretch of nowhere?" "Could ask you the same," he countered, eyeing her curiously. "Not many women ride alone through these parts." Catherine's expression hardened slightly. "Not many women have to outrun bounty hunters either, but here we are." Quentin's hand drifted back toward his gun. "You're wanted." "Not in the way you're thinking," she replied calmly. "The bounty hunters work for my father. I'm something of a runaway bride." Quentin relaxed slightly, though his curiosity was piqued. "Most folks run to something, not just away." "I'm headed to Silver Creek," she said. "My aunt owns a dress shop there. She'll take me in until I can make my own way." "Silver Creek?" Quentin frowned. "That's still a good 3 days' ride from here, assuming the weather holds." Catherine nodded, her face set with determination. "I'll make it." "Those men still on your trail, 2 of them. Lost them yesterday at the river crossing, but they're persistent. My father pays well." Her tone was bitter. Quentin studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. He had his own reasons for avoiding entanglements of any kind, especially with women running from trouble. Yet something about Catherine Adler's straight-backed courage struck him. He'd been headed toward the Montana territory, but Silver Creek wasn't so far out of his way. "I'm riding west," he found himself saying. "Could accompany you as far as Silver Creek." Surprise flickered across Catherine's face. "Why would you do that?" Quentin shrugged, unwilling to examine his own motivations too closely. "Dangerous country for a woman alone, even one who rides like you do." "I don't have much money to pay you," she warned, not asking for payment. He drained his coffee cup and set it down. "Just company on the trail." "Gets quiet sometimes." Catherine studied him carefully. "Most men want something, Mr. Frost." "Not me," he said simply. "Just heading the same way is all." After a moment's consideration, she nodded. "Then I accept your escort, Mr. Frost. Thank you." Quentin stood and began breaking camp, pointedly ignoring the strange feeling in his chest like something long dormant was stirring to life. It was just trail courtesy, he told himself. Nothing more than that. By the time the sun had fully cleared the horizon, they were riding west together, two strangers bound by nothing more than a shared cup of coffee and a common direction. Neither could have guessed how that simple beginning would change everything that followed. The first day's ride passed in relative silence. Quentin wasn't much for conversation, and Catherine seemed content with the quiet, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon behind them for signs of pursuit. By mid-afternoon, clouds had gathered, threatening rain. "There's a line shack about an hour ahead," Quentin said, breaking the long silence. "Used by the R Ranch hands during Roundup, should be empty this time of year." Catherine nodded gratefully. "I've been sleeping rough for 3 nights. A roof would be welcome." They reached the line shack just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. It was a simple one-room structure with a small corral attached, but it was sound and dry inside. Quentin tended to the horses while Catherine gathered kindling for the pot-bellied stove. By the time he entered the shack, she had a small fire crackling, warming the interior. The rain drummed steadily on the tin roof. "You've done this before," Quentin observed, noting the efficient way she'd arranged their meager supplies. "I grew up on my father's estate in Boston, but I spent summers on my uncle's ranch in Colorado," she explained, rolling out her bedroll on one side of the room. "I'm not as helpless as I might appear." "Never thought you were," Quentin replied honestly. He placed his own bedroll on the opposite side of the small space, maintaining a respectful distance. As the evening wore on and the rain intensified, Catherine gradually shared more of her story. Her father, a wealthy Boston businessman, had arranged her marriage to the son of his business partner, a man 30 years her senior with a reputation for cruelty toward his previous wife. "When I refused, my father locked me in my room," she said quietly, staring into the small fire. "Said I'd stay there until I came to my senses. So I climbed out the window, took the money I'd been saving, and bought a train ticket as far west as it would take me." Quentin listened silently, struck by her courage. "Your father sent bounty hunters after his own daughter." Catherine's laugh was hollow. "He calls them recovery agents. The wedding was to secure a business merger worth millions. To him, I'm just another asset to be deployed for profit." The bitterness in her voice stirred something in Quentin, a protective instinct he'd thought long buried. "You're safe now," he found himself saying. "We'll get you to Silver Creek." Catherine looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Frost? Truly?" Quentin considered the question, then shrugged. "Man gets tired of his own company after a while." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all he was ready to admit, even to himself. The next morning broke clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night. As Quentin tended the fire and prepared his morning coffee, Catherine stepped outside to check on the horses. She returned moments later, her face tense. "Riders coming, 3 of them." Quentin moved to the small window, peering out at the approaching men. They were still distant, but their purposeful direction suggested they weren't just passing by. Could be ranch hands, he said, though he doubted it. Or bounty hunters, Catherine countered, already gathering her things. I need to go. Quentin placed a restraining hand on her arm. Wait, if they're tracking you, running now just confirms they're on the right trail. He considered their options quickly. Let me handle this. Before Catherine could protest, he handed her his shotgun. Stay inside, out of sight. If things go bad, there's a back window. Take my horse, he's faster, and ride hard for Silver Creek. The fear in her eyes was tempered by determination. I won't leave you to face them alone. Not planning on facing anything, Quentin said grimly. Just going to have a conversation. He checked his revolver and stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The three riders approached cautiously, hands resting near their weapons. They were rough-looking men, trail-worn and hard-eyed. The leader, a burly man with a thick mustache, reined in several yards away. Morning, Quentin called, keeping his posture relaxed despite the tension coiling in his gut. Morning, the leader returned, his eyes scanning the shack behind Quentin. You alone out here? Just passing through, Quentin replied easily. Waited out the storm. Seen anyone else on the trail? A woman riding a chestnut mare. The man's eyes were calculating, assessing. Quentin shrugged. Passed a few travelers headed east yesterday, no women that I recall. The leader exchanged glances with his companions. Mind if we look around? Girl we're after is worth a fair bit to her daddy. Actually, I do mind, Quentin said, his voice hardening though his stance remained casual. This may be ranch property, but I've claimed it for the night. You're welcome to water your horses at the stream yonder, then be on your way. The leader's eyes narrowed. You're mighty protective of an empty shack. Just particular about my privacy, Quentin replied. His hand hovered near his holster now, the gesture subtle but unmistakable. Especially when strangers come asking questions about women they're chasing. A tense silence stretched between them. Quentin was outnumbered, but something in his steady gaze made the leader reconsider his options. We'll water our horses, the man finally said. But this trail's the most direct route to Silver Creek. If she passed this way, we'll find her. It was as much a threat as a statement. Quentin nodded, not breaking eye contact. Good hunting, then. The men turned their horses toward the stream, speaking in low voices. Quentin remained outside, watching until they'd watered their mounts and continued on, taking the northern trail rather than the western one that led to Silver Creek. When he re-entered the shack, Catherine was standing by the window, Quentin's shotgun still in her hands. They're gone. For now, Quentin confirmed. They're taking the wrong trail, but they mentioned Silver Creek. They know where you're headed. Catherine set the shotgun down carefully. Then I need to change my plans. I can't bring trouble to my aunt's door. We'll figure something out, Quentin said. But first, we need to move. They might circle back once they realize they've been misdirected. They packed quickly, erasing all signs of their presence. As Catherine saddled her mare, she glanced at Quentin. Thank you. You risked yourself for a stranger. You're not exactly a stranger anymore, he replied. Not after sharing my coffee. The hint of a smile touched her lips. Is that all it takes with you, Mr. Frost? A sip of coffee? Never shared it before, he admitted, surprising himself with the confession. Guess that makes you special. Something passed between them, then a moment of connection that neither was prepared to acknowledge. Catherine looked away first, mounting her horse with practiced grace. We should go, she said softly. They rode hard that day, taking a winding path through forested foothills to throw off any potential pursuit. Quentin knew these lands well from years of drifting, and he led them through hidden valleys and unmarked trails. By nightfall, they'd covered significant ground, emerging into a small, secluded meadow nestled between towering pines. We'll camp here, Quentin decided, dismounting. No fire tonight, can't risk the smoke being spotted. Catherine nodded, though weariness was evident in the slump of her shoulders as she slid from her saddle. They worked together to set up a cold camp, sharing dried beef and hardtack for their evening meal. As night fully descended, bringing with it a blanket of stars that seemed close enough to touch, Catherine huddled in her blanket, shivering slightly in the mountain chill. "Here," Quentin said, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a small flask and handed it to her. "Not coffee, but it'll warm you." Catherine took a cautious sip of the whiskey, coughing slightly at the burn. "Thank you." She handed the flask back, their fingers brushing momentarily. "May I ask you something personal, Mr. Frost?" "Quentin," he corrected. "And you can ask, might not answer." "Quentin, then?" She pulled her blanket tighter. "Why do you travel alone? You seem capable enough to have found steady work somewhere." He was silent for so long that Catherine thought he'd chosen not to answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Had a wife once, ranch in Colorado." "Thought I'd settled for good." Catherine waited, sensing there was more to the story. "Influenza took her and our son in '71, he continued, staring up at the stars. "After that, staying put didn't make much sense anymore." "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly, genuine compassion in her voice. Quentin shrugged, but the casualness of the gesture was belied by the tightness around his eyes. "Was a long time ago. Is that why the coffee is so important to you?" she asked gently. His eyes found hers in the darkness. "Anna, my wife, she always said I made the best coffee in the territory. After she was gone, it became something to hold on to, I guess, silly thing to get particular about." "It's not silly at all," Catherine said. "We all need our rituals." They fell into companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts as the night deepened around them. Quentin took the first watch, his back against a tree trunk, listening to Catherine's breathing gradually slow and even out as sleep claimed her. He studied her in the moonlight, the determined set of her jaw even in sleep, the strand of honey-colored hair that had escaped her braid. She was nothing like Anna, who had been soft-spoken and gentle. Catherine Adler had fire in her veins, a steel core beneath her refined exterior. Yet something about her called to him, awakening feelings he'd thought long buried with his family. The realization was unsettling. Quentin had spent 7 years ensuring he formed no lasting connections, drifting from job to job, place to place. Caring for someone meant risking loss, and he'd had his fill of that particular pain. Yet as he watched Catherine sleep, he couldn't deny the protective instinct that had taken root since she'd first approached his campfire and asked for a sip of his precious coffee. Dawn found them already on the move, taking a circuitous route toward Silver Creek. Quentin had decided during his watch that they would avoid the main trails entirely, even though it would add an extra day to their journey. "There's a trading post about half a day's ride from here," he explained as they navigated a narrow deer path. "Run by a Shoshone man named Joseph Elkhorn. He might have news about those men and we can resupply." Catherine nodded, adjusting her hat against the morning sun. "You seem to know this area well." "Worked as a scout for the Army years back," Quentin replied. "Learned every creek and hollow between here and the Idaho Territory." By mid-afternoon, they emerged from the forest into a small clearing where a sturdy log structure stood, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Several horses were hitched outside, including one that Quentin recognized with a frown. "That's one of the horses from yesterday," he said quietly, reining in at the forest edge. "Looks like our friends found the trading post too." Catherine's face tightened with worry. "What now?" Quentin considered their options. "Circle around, try another route. Might add another day to the journey. Or we could face them," Catherine suggested, surprising him. "I'm tired of running, Quentin, and there's only so far I can go before I run out of West." He studied her determined expression, admiring her courage even as he questioned her judgment. 3 against 2 aren't great odds, especially when they're specifically looking for you." "Then perhaps we need to change the story," Catherine said thoughtfully. "Give them a reason to stop looking." "What do you have in mind?" A slow smile spread across Catherine's face. "How do you feel about playing the part of my husband?" Quentin's eyebrows rose. "Your husband?" "Think about it," she explained, enthusiasm growing in her voice. "They're looking for Catherine Adler, a woman traveling alone, but a married couple, perhaps the Frosts, traveling to visit family. That's an entirely different matter. It was a bold plan, but not without merit. Quentin nodded slowly. Might work, need to make it convincing, though. I spent 3 years in Boston theater productions before my father decided it was an unsuitable pastime for a lady of my standing, Catherine replied with a hint of pride. I can be convincing. And so it was that Quentin and Catherine Frost rode openly into the trading post yard, her side saddle position adjusted to appear more natural, his arm casually protective around her waist as he helped her dismount. They entered the trading post together, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back in a gesture of familiar intimacy. The interior was dimly lit, shelves stocked with supplies and trade goods. Behind the counter stood a tall, dignified Shoshone man who Quentin recognized as Joseph Elkhorn. Near the pot-bellied stove, the 3 men from the line shack sat drinking coffee, their eyes immediately fixing on the newcomers. "Joseph," Quentin called warmly. "Good to see you again, old friend." Joseph Elkhorn's dark eyes showed momentary surprise before he masterfully concealed it. "Quentin Frost, been some years. Indeed it has. Allow me to introduce my wife, Catherine." Quentin's voice was steady, though the word wife felt strange on his tongue after so many years. Catherine stepped forward with perfect poise, extending her gloved hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Elkhorn. Quentin has told me so much about you." Joseph took her hand, playing along with the charade though his eyes held questions. "Welcome to my humble establishment, Mrs. Frost. What brings you to these parts?" "We're on our way to visit my sister in Silver Creek," Catherine explained, her voice carrying just enough for the men by the stove to overhear. "I've been away from the West for too long, visiting my parents in Boston. Quentin finally came to fetch me home." The leader of the bounty hunters had straightened in his chair, his attention now fully on them. Quentin tensed inwardly while maintaining his relaxed demeanor. "Need some supplies for the journey," Quentin told Joseph, moving toward the counter while keeping Catherine close. "Coffee especially." "My wife has developed quite a taste for my morning brew." Catherine laughed, a musical sound that transformed her face. "It's true. I've never tasted coffee so fine, a closely guarded secret, apparently." As Joseph began gathering their requested supplies, the bounty hunter leader approached them, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Pardon the intrusion, folks, but you look mighty familiar, madam." Catherine turned, the perfect picture of polite confusion. "Do we know each other, sir?" "Don't believe so, just, you remind me of someone I'm looking for." His eyes flicked to Quentin, recognition dawning. "We met yesterday, didn't we, at the line shack?" "That we did," Quentin acknowledged. "You were asking about a woman traveling alone." The man looked between them, suspicion evident in his gaze. "Mighty convenient, you showing up with a wife now." Catherine stepped closer to Quentin, her hand slipping into his with natural ease. "We've been married 5 years this spring, sir. I can assure you I'm not the woman you're seeking." "Perhaps you could show him our marriage certificate, darling," Quentin suggested, the endearment rolling off his tongue with surprising ease. "Of course." Catherine reached into her saddlebag and produced a folded document. It was, Quentin realized with amazement, an actual marriage certificate, though not theirs. She handed it to the bounty hunter with confident grace. The man studied the document, his frown deepening. It clearly showed the names Quentin and Catherine Frost, married in Denver 5 years prior. The certificate was genuine, though the names had been altered with remarkable skill. "Satisfied?" Quentin asked mildly, though his hand rested casually near his holster. The bounty hunter handed back the certificate, his suspicion not entirely dispelled but lacking firm ground to press further. "Sorry for the confusion, madam, the girl we're after. She's causing her poor father considerable distress." "I hope you find her," Catherine said with perfect sincerity. "Family troubles are so difficult." The man tipped his hat and rejoined his companions, all 3 soon departing the trading post with backward glances that suggested their suspicions weren't entirely allayed. Once they were alone except for Joseph, Quentin turned to Catherine with newfound respect. "A marriage certificate. Where did you get that? Catherine's smile was tinged with mischief. It belonged to my lady's maid. She eloped last year and left this behind. I took it when I fled, thinking it might prove useful. A bit of careful alteration with pen and ink did the rest. Joseph Elkhorn approached them, amusement evident in his dark eyes. You have interesting taste in women now, my friend. This one has many secrets. Don't I know it? Quentin replied, still amazed by Catherine's quick thinking. Those men really looking for her? Joseph nodded. They came asking questions yesterday. Offering good money for information, I told them nothing, of course. Thank you, Catherine said sincerely. My father is persistent. They are camped at the creek crossing, Joseph informed them. Planning to watch the trails to Silver Creek for several days. Your performance may have confused them, but they are not fools. Quentin considered this news. We need another route. There is an old Shoshone trail that leads to the valley behind Silver Creek, Joseph offered. Difficult passage, but it would bring you to the town from the east, not the west where they watch. I can draw you a map. As Joseph sketched the trail route on a piece of butcher paper, Catherine moved to examine the trading post's limited selection of goods. Quentin joined her, lowering his voice. That was quick thinking back there. You're quite the actress. Catherine selected a small tin of hard candies, a rare luxury in these parts. Theater was my passion before my father decided it was beneath our family's dignity. In truth, I was hoping to join a professional company someday. You're talented enough, Quentin acknowledged. That certificate trick was inspired. And your performance as the devoted husband was quite convincing, she replied with a hint of teasing in her voice. You played the part admirably. Something in her tone made Quentin pause. The charade had felt strangely natural, her hand in his, the easy way they'd moved together, the endearments that had come unbidden to his lips. For a brief moment, he'd allowed himself to imagine what such a life might be like, after years of solitary wandering. Just doing what needed doing, he said finally, retreating behind his usual reserve. Catherine's eyes lingered on his face for a moment before she turned back to her shopping. Of course. As was I. They purchased their supplies, thanked Joseph for his help with the map, and departed the trading post, taking care to maintain their married couple pretense until they were well away from any potential observers. The Shoshone Trail proved as challenging as Joseph had warned, a narrow path winding through steep ravines and dense forest. They were forced to dismount and lead the horses through several difficult passages, working together to navigate fallen trees and rocky inclines. By nightfall, they were deep in the mountains, the trail ahead growing increasingly difficult to follow in the fading light. They made camp in a small clearing beside a bubbling stream, the sound of rushing water providing cover for their conversation. We should reach Silver Creek by tomorrow evening if we keep a good pace, Quentin said, spreading their newly acquired map on a flat rock. Coming in from the east will avoid those men, assuming they're still watching the western approaches. Catherine nodded, though Quentin noticed she seemed distracted, her usual alertness dimmed by something like melancholy. Something wrong? He asked as he built a small, sheltered fire. She stirred from her thoughts, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Just thinking about what happens when we reach Silver Creek. You'll be safe with your aunt, Quentin assured her. Those men won't look for you there once the trail goes cold. Yes, I suppose that's true. Catherine busied herself preparing their simple dinner from the supplies they'd purchased. And you? Where will you go after Silver Creek? The question hung in the air between them. Quentin had been purposely avoiding thoughts of their inevitable parting, focusing instead on the immediate goal of getting Catherine safely to town. North, probably, he said finally. Might find work with one of the big cattle outfits in Montana. They're always needing experienced hands. Catherine nodded, her expression carefully neutral. A sensible plan. They ate their dinner in unusual silence, each lost in private thoughts. As they finished, Catherine reached into her saddlebag and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. I got you something at the trading post, she said, handing it to him. "A small thank you for all you've done." Surprised, Quentin unwrapped the package to find a small, beautifully crafted tin coffee pot, more elegant than his battered old one but still practical for trail use. "I noticed yours was quite worn," Catherine explained, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "And since coffee is so important to you." Quentin ran his fingers over the smooth metal, unexpectedly touched by the thoughtful gift. "This is mighty fine," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Thank you, Catherine. I thought perhaps." She hesitated, then seemed to gather her courage. "I thought perhaps when you use it, you might remember our journey together." The implication was clear. This was a parting gift, an acknowledgement that their paths would soon diverge. Quentin felt an unexpected tightness in his chest at the thought. "Not likely to forget," he said quietly. Their eyes met across the small fire, and something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings neither had been prepared to discover. Catherine looked away first, rising to tend to the horses for the night. Quentin watched her go, the new coffee pot still in his hands. 7 years of careful isolation, of keeping everyone at arm's length, and somehow this woman had slipped past his defenses in less than a week. All because he'd broken his one rule and shared his morning coffee. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the mountains painted in soft pinks and golds as the sun crested the eastern peaks. They packed up camp in companionable silence, the tension of the previous evening giving way to the practical demands of the journey ahead. The trail grew steeper as they ascended through a high mountain pass, the horses straining against the incline. By mid-morning they had reached the summit, revealing a breathtaking vista of the valley below, with Silver Creek nestled against the far mountains like a scattered handful of toy blocks. "There it is," Quentin said, pointing to the distant town. "We should make it by sunset." Catherine stared at their destination, her expression unreadable. "It looks so small from up here." "Most places do," Quentin replied. "Doesn't mean there's not room to build a life there." They began their descent, the trail winding through pine forests and alpine meadows bursting with late summer wildflowers. As they rode, Catherine gradually shared her plans for life in Silver Creek, working in her aunt's dress shop, perhaps eventually opening a small theater or school for the local children. "I've always loved teaching," she explained as they navigated a particularly steep section of trail. "Before my father insisted I focus on becoming a proper society wife, I taught music to children in our neighborhood." "You'd be good at it," Quentin observed. "Got a natural way of explaining things." Catherine smiled at the unexpected compliment. "Thank you, what about you?" "Have you ever thought of teaching? You know so much about the land, tracking, survival." Quentin had never considered such a possibility. His life since Anna's death had been purposely rootless, avoiding any occupation that might tie him to one place or create bonds with others. "Never gave it much thought," he admitted. "Not much call for trail guides teaching school children. Perhaps not in Boston," Catherine conceded, "but out here, those are valuable skills worth passing on." The idea planted a small seed in Quentin's mind, a possibility he hadn't previously considered. Before he could pursue the thought further, however, the distant sound of gunfire echoed through the valley. They reined in sharply, exchanging alarmed glances. The shots had come from somewhere ahead, in the direction of Silver Creek. "Could be hunters," Catherine suggested, though her tense posture belied her hopeful words. Quentin shook his head. "Too regular, sounds like trouble." He studied the trail ahead, making a quick decision. "There's a ridge about half a mile on that overlooks the lower valley. Let's check it out before we ride any further." They proceeded cautiously, alert for any sign of danger. When they reached the ridge, Quentin dismounted and pulled his field glass from his saddlebag, crawling to the edge to survey the scene below. What he saw made his blood run cold. A group of riders, at least 8 men, had ambushed a stagecoach on the main road into Silver Creek. Even from this distance, Quentin could see bodies on the ground and the flash of gunfire as the robbery continued. "Road agents," he told Catherine grimly, handing her the glass. "Hitting the stage about 3 miles outside of town." Catherine looked through the glass, her face paling. "They're killing everyone," she whispered. "Even after they've surrendered." Quentin nodded grimly. These weren't ordinary bandits just after the strongbox. This was a massacre in progress. As they watched, one of the outlaws dragged a woman from the stagecoach, her screams faintly audible even at this distance. "We need to help them," Catherine said urgently, already moving back to her horse. Quentin caught her arm. "Catherine, there's at least 8 of them, well armed. We'd be riding to our deaths, so we do nothing." Her eyes flashed with a mixture of outrage and desperation. "That could be my aunt on that stage. It's the weekly run from Granite City to Silver Creek." The realization hit Quentin like a physical blow. The timing was indeed right for the regular stage run, and if Catherine's aunt had been traveling to meet her niece. "We can't just charge in," he insisted, his mind racing through options. "But maybe we can create a diversion, draw some of them off." They quickly formulated a plan. Using the cover of the forest, they would circle around to approach the ambush site from different directions. Quentin would fire from one position to draw attention, while Catherine would set fire to the dry brush on the opposite side of the road, creating confusion and the impression of multiple attackers. "Be careful," Quentin told her as they prepared to separate. "If things go badly, ride for Silver Creek as fast as you can. Don't wait for me." Catherine's eyes met his fierce determination shining through her fear. "We'll both make it," she said firmly. Then, in a move that surprised them both, she leaned forward and pressed a quick kiss to his lips. "For luck," she whispered, before turning her horse and disappearing into the trees. Stunned by the unexpected kiss, Quentin watched her go, a new urgency fueling his determination to see them both through this alive. He circled wide to the north, positioning himself on a rocky outcrop with good visibility of the road below. The bandits had finished looting the stage and were preparing to leave. Their victims sprawled motionless on the ground except for one woman they'd kept alive, bound and thrown across a saddle. Quentin's jaw tightened as he recognized the tactics of the notorious Blackwell gang, who had terrorized 3 territories with their brutality. Taking careful aim with his Winchester, Quentin fired a shot that shattered the canteen hanging from the leader's saddle, then quickly repositioned as return fire peppered his previous location. Below, confusion erupted among the outlaws, who scrambled for cover. Unsure of how many attackers they faced, from the opposite side of the road, a column of smoke began to rise as Catherine's fire took hold in the dry brush. Several of the bandits turned in that direction, further dividing their attention. Quentin fired again, taking down one of the outlaws with a clean shot to the shoulder. The man fell from his horse, cursing loudly. 3 of his companions broke away from the main group, riding toward Quentin's position, exactly as planned. Quentin quickly relocated, moving through the rocks with the sure-footed confidence of a mountain lion. He fired twice more from his new position, creating the illusion of multiple shooters. Below, the remaining bandits were growing increasingly anxious, the fire now spreading rapidly thanks to the dry conditions and steady breeze. 2 more broke off to investigate the flames, leaving only the leader and 1 other guarding their prisoner and the stolen strongbox. It was the opening Quentin had been waiting for. He sprinted down the rocky slope, using the smoke from Catherine's fire as additional cover. Approaching from the blind side, he managed to get within 20 yards of the remaining outlaws before being spotted. The leader whirled, raising his pistol, but Quentin was faster. His first shot caught the man in the chest, sending him sprawling in the dust. The second outlaw managed to fire a wild shot that whistled past Quentin's ear before Quentin's return fire dropped him with a leg wound. Quentin rushed to the bound woman, relief washing through him when he saw it wasn't Catherine's aunt, but rather a young woman he didn't recognize. He quickly cut her bonds. "Can you ride?" he asked urgently. She nodded, clearly terrified but holding herself together with remarkable composure. They killed everyone else, she whispered. The driver, the guard, the other passengers. No time for that now, Quentin said, helping her onto one of the outlaws' horses. Ride hard for Silver Creek, tell the sheriff what happened here. As she galloped away, Quentin turned his attention to the scattered bandits, who were regrouping as they realized they'd been outmaneuvered by just 2 people. He needed to find Catherine and get them both away before the remaining outlaws closed in. A flash of movement caught his eye. Catherine's chestnut mare, racing along the ridgeline with 2 riders in pursuit. She was heading for a narrow ravine that would give her a chance to lose them in the dense forest beyond. Quentin mounted quickly, spurring his horse toward an intercept point. If he could reach the ravine first, he could provide covering fire for Catherine's escape. He pushed his mount hard, taking a dangerous shortcut down a steep embankment. The horse stumbled briefly before regaining its footing, carrying Quentin at breakneck speed toward the ravine entrance. He arrived just moments before Catherine, positioning himself behind a large boulder. When she galloped past, he called out, "Catherine, here!" She reined in sharply, spotting him. Relief washed over her face, quickly replaced by alarm as she saw the pursuing riders approaching. "Behind you." Quentin turned, rifle already rising. He fired twice in rapid succession, hitting the lead rider and causing the second to veer off sharply. "Go," he shouted to Catherine. "I'll hold them off." But instead of fleeing, Catherine dismounted, pulling her own rifle from its scabbard. "Not without you," she said firmly, taking position beside him. Together they held off the remaining bandits, their combined fire forcing the outlaws to retreat to a safe distance. When the shooting paused, Quentin grabbed Catherine's arm. "This is our chance. They'll bring the others soon. We need to move." They mounted quickly, taking a hidden game trail that wound through the ravine and emerged high on the eastern slope, well away from the remaining bandits. By the time they reached a vantage point overlooking the ambush site, they could see riders approaching from the direction of Silver Creek, the sheriff's posse, responding to the young woman's alarm. "We did it," Catherine breathed, tension draining from her shoulders. "We actually did it." Quentin nodded, still scanning for any sign of pursuit. "You were brave back there, reckless but brave." Catherine turned to him, her eyes bright with the lingering excitement of danger survived. "You could have left, taken the safe path to Silver Creek. Why did you stay?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the immediate circumstances. Quentin found himself unable to maintain the emotional distance he'd cultivated for so many years. "Couldn't leave you," he said simply. "Not now, maybe not ever." The words surprised them both. Catherine's eyes widened, searching his face for confirmation of what she'd heard. "What are you saying, Quentin?" He took a deep breath, stepping into unknown territory after years of careful isolation. "I'm saying that meeting you has changed things, changed me. I've been running from connecting with people ever since I lost Anna and our son, but these past days with you." "I feel it too," Catherine said softly when he hesitated. "I was running away from a life I didn't want, but I never expected to find someone who would make me want to stop running." They gazed at each other, the unspoken feelings of the past days finally acknowledged. Slowly, Quentin reached out, brushing a strand of honey-colored hair from Catherine's face. "I can't offer you much," he warned. "Don't have land or money or position." Catherine smiled, leaning into his touch. "I've had all those things. They didn't make me happy." Her hand covered his, holding it against her cheek. "Besides, you have excellent coffee. What more could a woman want?" Quentin laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "Is that all it takes, a good cup of coffee?" "It was enough to make me stop at your campfire," she reminded him. Everything else followed from that first sip. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting the valley in golden light, Quentin pulled Catherine close. This time when their lips met, it wasn't a hurried kiss for luck, but a deliberate promise, the beginning of something neither had been looking for but both had found. They rode into Silver Creek as the last rays of sunlight gilded the simple wooden buildings of the frontier town. The main street was bustling with activity as news of the stagecoach robbery spread. The sheriff and his posse had returned with the captured bandits and recovered strongbox, bringing a measure of justice to the tragic event. Catherine's aunt, Catherine Adler, had not been on the ill-fated stage as feared. She greeted her niece with tearful relief at the dress shop she owned on Silver Creek's Main Street, welcoming Quentin with genuine gratitude when Catherine explained how he had protected her on the journey. "You'll stay with us, of course," Alina insisted, showing them to the comfortable apartment above the shop where she lived. "It's the least I can offer after all you've done for Catherine." That evening, after a home-cooked meal that tasted like paradise after days of trail rations, Alina tactfully retired early, leaving Catherine and Quentin alone by the small hearth in the sitting room. "What will you do now?" Catherine asked softly, her hand finding his in the firelight. Quentin considered the question carefully. For 7 years, his answer would have been simple: move on, find the next job, keep his connections fleeting. But now, looking at the woman beside him, he found himself wanting something he hadn't dared desire since losing his family a place to belong, a future shared with someone who understood him. "I'm thinking of staying in Silver Creek," he said finally. "Sheriff mentioned they're needing a deputy. Said my handling of those road agents caught his attention." Catherine's face brightened with hope. "You'd consider settling here, if I had reason enough to stay," he replied, his meaning clear in his steady gaze. She moved closer, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. "I think you might find several reasons. The town needs good men. My aunt needs help with some repairs to the shop, and I." She hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty. "I need you, Quentin. These past days have shown me what it means to find someone who sees me for who I truly am." Quentin's arm tightened around her. "Never expected to find this again," he admitted. "After Anna died, I convinced myself that kind of happiness wasn't meant for me twice in one lifetime. Perhaps some people are fortunate enough to find love more than once," Catherine suggested gently. "Different loves, each special in their own way." They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the fire dance in the hearth. Finally, Catherine spoke again, her voice tinged with amusement. "You realize, of course, that if you take the deputy position, you'll have to share your coffee with the entire sheriff's office." Quentin chuckled, the sound coming easier now. "Might make an exception for the sheriff, but I reserve my best brew for more select company." Catherine smiled up at him. "I'm honored to be among the chosen few." "You're not among them," Quentin corrected, his eyes warm as they met hers. "You're the only one." In the weeks that followed, Silver Creek witnessed the gradual transformation of Quentin Frost from solitary drifter to respected deputy sheriff. He moved into a small cabin on the edge of town, spending his free time helping Alina with repairs to her shop and courting Catherine with a deliberate patience that spoke of a man who understood the value of building something meant to last. Catherine thrived in Silver Creek, assisting in her aunt's shop while organizing a small theater group that performed for the townsfolk on Saturday evenings. Her natural talent for teaching soon led to an informal school for the younger children, held in the church when the circuit preacher wasn't in town. The bounty hunters sent by her father eventually abandoned their search, especially after the sheriff made it clear they weren't welcome in Silver Creek. Catherine wrote to her father, explaining her new life and inviting reconciliation on her terms. Whether he would eventually accept her independence remained to be seen, but she faced the future with confidence, secure in the life she was building. 6 months after their arrival in Silver Creek, on a crisp autumn morning, Quentin and Catherine were married in a simple ceremony attended by the entire town. Alina wept happy tears as she stood witness, and even the gruff sheriff was seen to discreetly wipe his eyes during the exchange of vows. As the newly wedded couple stepped out of the small church into the golden October sunlight, Catherine leaned close to her husband. "Do you remember what you told me that first day when I asked why you were helping me?" she asked. Quentin smiled, his hand warm around hers. "Said I was tired of my own company. And now," Her eyes sparkled with happiness and the promise of their shared future. Quentin drew her close, his kiss a testament to the journey that had brought them together, a journey that began with a simple request for a sip of coffee. "Now," he said when they parted, "I can't imagine any company I'd rather keep for the rest of my days." The years that followed proved the truth of those words. Quentin and Catherine built a life in Silver Creek that neither had imagined possible when they first met at that lonely campfire. They welcomed a daughter the following year, naming her Anna Aliner in honor of the past and present that had shaped their journey. Quentin eventually became sheriff when his predecessor retired, while Catherine's school grew into a proper academy that drew students from neighboring settlements. Each morning without fail, Quentin would rise early to brew his special coffee, the ritual now shared with the woman who had dared to ask for a sip, and in doing so had changed both their lives forever. And on quiet evenings when they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, they would sometimes speak of that fateful morning, of how the simple act of sharing had opened the door to everything that followed. For Quentin Frost had never shared his coffee until Catherine asked for a sip, and in that moment, without either of them knowing it, they had already begun to share their hearts.